whether you're going to condemn the college student groups that are making silly statements over here or the $100 million of humanitarian aid over there. I see Republicans rushing to analyze the mosquitoes on the elephant's tail without talking about the actual elephant in the room.
But this just seems like
what we should do.
If we believe someone committed murder,
yeah,
we find that person and we punish him.
That's right.
So that would seem like the most obvious solution.
Well, I think that there are some in the U.S. that are so bloodthirsty and have been rooting for outcomes that have really, from their standpoint, nothing to do with this conflict, that might want to use this conflict as an excuse to do what they otherwise might have wanted to do anyway, which is reopen broad-scale regional war in the Middle East, which we haven't had since Iraq and Afghanistan came to a close. These are cynical forces that exist in some wings of the U.S. But I can't speak for why others aren't really clear-headedly asking, what exactly is our plan of action? What advances U.S. interests? What exactly should we tell Israel we will and won't support? And how could that possibly positively influence Israel to make the right decisions here? But I think there's first principle, go after the people who are responsible for this in an achievable goal in a way, and I would say, metaphorically or literally, put their heads on stakes, make sure that we actually have a clear deterrence, that something like this never happens again. And then I think there are ways that Israel could really turn the tables.
So
here.
You're not arguing on behalf of Hamas?
Of course. I mean, the things that people will say on the internet appall me, but Hamas is a terrorist group and deserves to be held accountable for the dastardly acts. I mean, this was barbaric. It was medieval. And I think a direct response to exact justice from Hamas is 100% morally justified. And as U.S. president, if I were in that office, I would provide every bit of diplomatic air cover to Israel to do what it needs to do, because I'm also looking after the U.S. interest here. I don't want the U.S. military involved in some tripwire of a war in the Middle East that we sleepwalk ourselves into, which isn't good for the U.S., but isn't even likely good for Israel. Now, I think that there are some broader regional issues that we need to deal with, too. I mean, one of the lurking issues here is the nuclear capabilities of Iran. And if I had the clear answers, if any of us had the clear answers to exactly how you would keep Iran from becoming nuclear weapon equipped, we wouldn't be talking about this right now. But I think a maximum pressure campaign against Iran, economically speaking, until they actually fully phase out their nuclear weapons is a reasonable discussion and debate to have. I think we can avoid doing some really stupid things that we've done along the way, though, in the meantime, this year. Think about the discussion around transferring nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia.
Now, why would you ever want, and Saudi Arabia, which got some of the deepest energy reserves in the world, clearly doesn't need nuclear plants, so that technology would be used for nuclear weapons. Why would you ever want the Saudi kingdom to have nuclear weapons?
Well, it's even one step worse than that, right? We've done civilian nuclear technology transfers. I think we've done something like 27 deals with 43 countries.
Yes.
Saudi Arabia did not want the terms of those traditional civilian nuclear technology transfers because they require oversight and monitoring to make sure you're not using them for military purposes. So the idiocy of this, and it's not just Biden. I mean, Biden's idiocy is high, but there's Republicans going along with him to say that as a condition for getting Saudi Arabia into some type of expanded diplomatic deal with Israel, we were going to offer security guarantees to Saudi Arabia, and furthermore, that we were going to offer this nuclear transfer on terms that were different than the historical civilian nuclear transfers.
So the idea is to counterbalance Iran, I assume.
But actually, if you look at it the other way, we've had I'm not saying it's a comfortable balance of power, but there has been something resembling a balance of power. This is this summer we're talking about it, Tucker, and this is an uncomfortable topic, but we can't just dismiss the possibility that these two things are entirely unrelated. I mean, right when we have inserted our noses in to this, what I think is a terrible idea of a deal with Saudi Arabia, and I think many in Israel and otherwise agreed with me too, that transferring nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia on these differential terms and security guarantees, that shouldn't be necessarily what's required to drive Saudi Arabia into a peaceful deal with Israel. In some ways, we're the ones that just stuck our noses and tipped the scales in that balance of power if that Saudi Arabian deal were going to proceed. And then what do you get 2 months later? This disastrous attack. So I think that there are complicated factors at work here that we can take our own goals that we have scored in this process off the table. And then all of those savings from a war that we would have avoided, you know what Israel and U.S. can use it for? Protecting our own respective borders. I mean, that was a border crisis of historic proportion. But that was a national defense failure.
I agree completely.
And if it can happen in Israel, it can happen here too, by the way.
And it is.
And it is on the regular.
Yes. So, but just to back up for one click, the idea that we would in any way abet a nuclear program in any country, particularly in
the
Saudi
Middle East,
Arabia, is so destabilizing and crazy. It suggests that people have lost their awe of their fear of nuclear weapons. I'm watching people on television, on the internet, sort of blithely talk about the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons in this conflict. I watched it 5 times yesterday. Can we agree that anyone who sort of throws out, well, maybe they'll use nukes, is insane? Like, you'd have to be a mental patient to say something like that. Who are these people?
I mean, either that or so profoundly ill-informed about what the consequences would be for the United States. And so I really can't speak for the mental state of some of these people, Tucker, who are viewing the expansion and nuclear proliferation to Saudi Arabia, or the consequences
people
of
are saying,
them.
this could go nuclear. If pushed, we'll go nuclear. They'll go nuclear. Go nuclear.
Yeah. Think about the consequences.
Millions died.
Of what that would be.
I mean, and the consequences of it are impossible to foresee, but we can guess.
Yeah. So this is what frustrates me about where we are in this. And, the views I'm adopting here, I think from a political perspective, a lot of people have advised me, this isn't really where you want to go. I think somebody has to step up and actually ask the questions that other people are too afraid to ask. What are the consequences of the biggest thing that's about to happen? If Israel mounts that ground war in Gaza, appears to be the next step in this conflict, and there's no clearly identified objective, what are the consequences for Israel? We ask that as a friend. What are the consequences for the United States? We should ask as Americans. And I think there's a better way. There may be multiple better ways to do this, but we're not going to get there unless we have actual unfettered debate on the merits. And I think there's something, particularly in the Republican Party, actually, around the culture of this issue that has really stifled that debate. The experience I've had, I mean, the first time you and I met was, I don't know if you remember this, was after when I was writing my first book. It was in the context of I'd been a biotech CEO and George Floyd died and this country started acting crazy and there were certain debates you couldn't have on questions relating to race and whatever back in 2020. I remember what that felt like. It was a speech suppressive environment where there were certain debates you weren't allowed to have. And many on the left would call me racist as a way of silencing open debate and believing in colorblind meritocracy. It feels really similar. It feels really similar in a different way right now, where isolationist has become the new racist, a new label to use as a substitute.
Bigot, saying that you hate Israel.
Exactly, or whatever. You could fill in the blank for whatever the silencing label would be. Pro-Hamas, ridiculous. Anti-Israel, ridiculous. But to use that to silence debate on the merits, and whether that comes from the left, the right, it doesn't much matter. That's, I think, the ultimate form of anti-Americanism.
Yeah, I have to say, if you're attacked for asking what's good for the United States and asking that as an American who's trying to lead the country, if that's considered out of bounds, if you're being denounced by Republicans for saying that,
roundly,
then the whole America First thing was just a lie.
Yeah, I think it wasn't a lie when it comes to the people of this country. I think a lot of the people in the leadership, though, would like to believe it was a lie, like to believe that it was a passing phase, an attachment to one man, where this is a broader vision that goes beyond.
Well, it's just common
any
sense.
individual.
If you live here and you've got children,
put this country first.
Well, that's your job.
Yeah, it's a moral obligation.
It's a little weird that people are picking sides, and the Capitol got invaded by these lunatics, pro-Hamas lunatics, and then people are taking the pro-Israel side. But I haven't heard anybody say, well, I have views on all this, and I like Israel better than Hamas, but ultimately I'm for America. Mm-hmm. Why? That seems like the natural position for Americans to take.
I think it's the more trustworthy position for Americans to take, not only with people at home. That's the moral obligation of an American leader. It's also more credible. If you're one of America's friends abroad and you say that I irrespectively and unconditionally stand with you regardless of my national interest, even if I'm sitting as somebody in Israel listening to an American say that, that's not credible. That's obviously fake.
We said that to Ukraine.
Yeah, we said that.
Don't believe us when we say that.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And our adversaries I think we can draw clearer red lines when we're just honest about the fact that U.S. leaders should act in the U.S. national interest. And the fact that that's become controversial, I think, shows how far our mistaken foreign policy establishment has come. But there's a better way to do this.
Vivek, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks.
And apologies in advance for all the trouble this will cause you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.